Maria grew up in a quiet town that looked peaceful from the outside, but inside, people carried unspoken fears. The streets were lined with small shops, friendly neighbors, and children playing after school. Yet, behind this picture of normal life, there was a shadow that most families chose not to talk about. The local police force had a reputation, and it was not the kind that gave comfort. They were powerful in ways that went beyond their duty, and many believed they crossed lines too often. People whispered about unfair treatment and about how sometimes things happened in the town that simply did not feel right. For Maria, these whispers were like distant echoes. She was only 18 and filled with hope. Her world was not built on fear but on dreams. She was the kind of girl who always carried a small notebook in her bag, writing down her plans for the future. She loved sketching little flowers and making lists of all the things she wanted to do one day. Her dream was to study in the city, far from the small town, and build a new life where opportunities were brighter. Maria lived with her mother in a modest apartment. Her father had left when she was young, so her mother worked extra hours to make sure Maria had what she needed. Their bond was strong, more like best friends than just mother and daughter. Every evening, Maria would sit at the kitchen table while her mother cooked, sharing stories about school and laughing over small things. Life was not perfect, but they had love, and that was enough to give them strength. On a warm evening, after finishing dinner with her friend Sarah, Maria decided to walk home. She enjoyed evening walks, they gave her time to think and breathe after a long day. The air was cool, and the streets were calm, with just a few people still outside. She walked with a light step, humming a tune softly to herself. She carried her small notebook in her bag, and she had written something earlier that day: "One day, I will leave this place, and I will be free to live the life I dream of." The road she took was familiar. She passed the bakery where she and her mother bought bread every Sunday morning, the corner store where she liked to get candy, and the old library with windows that looked like they belonged in another century. Everything seemed ordinary, yet there was a feeling in the air that Maria could not quite describe. The street lights flickered slightly, and the sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence. In another part of town, David, a young man in his late 20s, was also out that evening. He was not someone Maria knew personally, but their paths were about to cross in a way that neither of them could ever forget. David was thoughtful, the kind of person who often noticed details others missed. He carried his phone everywhere and had a habit of recording things around him, partly because he liked capturing moments and partly because he believed that sometimes the world needed witnesses. He had seen enough in this town to know that silence often protected the wrong people. As Maria walked, she thought about her mother waiting for her at home. Her mother always worried when she stayed out late, even if it was only for a short visit with friends. Maria promised herself she would call her mom as soon as she reached the next block, just to ease her heart. Life often feels normal until one moment changes everything. For Maria, that night was about to become unforgettable. She did not know that people in uniform, people she thought of as protectors, were close by. She did not know that someone else, standing in the shadows with a phone in his hand, would soon play a role in her life. And she certainly did not know that the events of that evening would travel far beyond her small town, reaching the attention of people who held real power. Maria's heart was light, but around her, the atmosphere of the town was heavier than ever. Many families had stories of injustice, but most stayed quiet because they were afraid of what might happen if they spoke. David had heard these stories many times. He often wondered, what would happen if someone finally brought the truth out into the open? Would things change? On that quiet evening, the answer to his question was beginning to form, though neither he nor Maria could see it yet. The stage was set for something extraordinary to unfold. Maria's steps slowed as she reached the narrow street leading home. She noticed how still the town was at that hour. Only the soft buzzing of the street light and the distant hum of a car engine filled the silence. She felt the kind of calm that makes a person believe the night will pass without event. Yet behind that calm, destiny was quietly moving pieces into place. Her life, up until now, had been simple and predictable. School, friends, dreams, and the love of her mother filled her days. But sometimes, life does not wait for us to be ready. Sometimes, it shakes us awake in the most unexpected ways. For Maria, that evening walk was about to become the turning point of her young life. David, standing not far away, adjusted the phone in his hand as if guided by instinct. He did not know why he felt the urge to keep his camera ready, but something inside told him the night would demand it. And as Maria turned the corner, unaware of what waited, the quiet town braced itself for a moment that would echo far beyond its borders. Maria stepped onto the next street, her thoughts still light and hopeful. She thought about the dress her mother had promised to buy her for graduation and about the letter she planned to write to the university in the city. Every dream seemed alive in her heart. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. As she walked, she noticed a patrol car slowly turning onto the road. The vehicle's lights flickered briefly, then dimmed, as if trying not to draw too much attention. Maria didn't think much of it at first. Police cars passed by all the time, and she had never had a reason to worry. She simply adjusted the strap of her bag and kept walking at her normal pace. The car stopped a little ahead, and two officers stepped out. Their expressions were serious, and their eyes scanned the street. Maria felt her heartbeat quicken, though she didn't know why. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She had only been walking home after visiting a friend. One of the officers called out to her. His tone was firm, not friendly. Maria froze for a moment, unsure of what she should do. She replied politely, explaining that she was just heading home. But instead of letting her pass, the officers walked closer. The atmosphere shifted. The quiet, peaceful night now felt heavy with tension. Maria clutched her notebook tighter in her bag, as though holding on to her dreams would somehow keep her safe. She tried to smile and repeated that she was just going home, but the officers began asking questions she didn't understand. They wanted to know why she was out so late, where she had been, and who she had spoken to. Their questions felt less like curiosity and more like an interrogation. Maria's voice trembled as she answered, though her words were simple and true. She had been at her friend's house, she explained. She had eaten dinner, laughed, and walked out just minutes ago. But the officers did not seem satisfied. David, standing quietly in the shadows nearby, watched everything unfold. At first, he thought it was just a normal stop, nothing unusual. But the way the officers surrounded Maria, the way their voices grew sharper, made him uneasy. He lifted his phone, pretending to scroll, but really preparing to record. He had learned from experience that sometimes things happen too quickly, and evidence disappeared if no one caught it in time. Maria looked around, hoping someone else might be nearby, someone who could reassure her that everything would be fine. But the street was nearly empty. The bakery had closed hours ago, the library was locked, and most neighbors were already inside their homes. She felt alone, standing under the flickering streetlight with two officers whose presence suddenly felt overwhelming. She thought of her mother waiting for her at home. If only she had called earlier, her mother would know where she was. A lump formed in Maria's throat, but she stayed calm. She didn't want to show fear. She answered every question carefully, with respect, hoping they would simply let her go. David's hands tightened around his phone. He sensed something was wrong. He had grown up in this town, and he knew how these moments could spiral. People often said nothing happened here, but David had heard the quiet stories of people being stopped, treated unfairly, and then told to keep silent. He remembered how a friend once told him, in this town, sometimes the truth is the hardest thing to see. Maria's heart raced as the officers continued pressing her. She could not understand why they wouldn't believe her. She was only a girl walking home. She had nothing to hide. She tried to reach for her phone, wanting to call her mother, but one of the officers told her to keep her hands where they could see them. Maria quickly obeyed, her eyes wide with confusion. David tapped the record button on his phone. He didn't know exactly what would happen next, but his instincts told him this moment needed to be captured. He adjusted his angle slightly so that the officers wouldn't notice, his breath steady but his mind racing. He knew that recordings could speak when words failed. The silence of the street made everything feel louder: the crunch of shoes on the pavement, the rustle of Maria's bag as she shifted nervously, the firm voices of the officers. Maria wished she could disappear, wished the night would swallow her whole so she could simply walk home like she always did. And then, in a moment she would never forget, everything shifted. The questions turned into commands. The atmosphere grew heavier, pressing down on her chest. Maria tried to explain again, but her words seemed to fall into the empty night without meaning. She felt her world spinning, as though the very ground beneath her feet was no longer steady. David held his phone tighter, every second of video now more important than the last. His heart pounded as he realized he was no longer just a witness, he was becoming part of something bigger, something that could change lives. He thought of his own family, of all the times they had warned him not to get involved. But he couldn't turn away now. Maria's thoughts raced to her mother's face. She pictured her waiting at the kitchen table, maybe checking the clock, maybe wondering why Maria hadn't called yet. That thought gave her strength. She told herself silently, "Stay calm. Just stay calm. This will pass." But deep down, she knew this was not ordinary. Something about this encounter felt different. It felt like a test, a moment that would mark her life forever. And just as her fear reached its peak, fate began to weave its next thread. Far from that small street, people in a distant office had already been watching the patterns of this town. Complaints had been piling up, reports had been quietly filed, and decisions had been made. Maria could not know it, David could not know it, and the officers certainly could not know it, but the eyes of the federal government were closer than anyone realized. The night was no longer just another evening in a small town. It had become the stage for a story that would ripple far beyond its borders. Maria stood there, trembling yet brave, unaware that help was on its way. David kept recording, unaware that his video would become a turning point. And somewhere, miles away, cars were being prepared, doors were opening, and agents were ready to move. What began as a simple walk home had now become the opening chapter of a story that would change Maria's life, David's courage, and the future of their entire town. David kept his phone steady, his heart racing faster with every passing second. He was not a hero by nature, but something about that moment made him realize he couldn't look away. The scene unfolding before him felt unfair, and though his hands trembled, he knew the world needed to see it. Maria, on the other hand, felt trapped in a situation she did not understand. She had always been taught to respect authority, to trust people in uniform. Yet that night, her trust felt shaken. She kept thinking about her mother waiting for her and about her notebook still inside her bag, filled with hopeful words about a future that suddenly felt far away. The officers continued their questioning, their voices sharper now, and Maria tried her best to answer every word clearly. She hoped if she stayed calm, everything would soon end. But instead of being dismissed, the questions became more confusing. They asked about people she had never met, places she had never been, and things she had no idea about. Each answer she gave seemed to invite another doubt. David whispered to himself, "This doesn't feel right." He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. He knew the video in his hand might be the only truth that could not be denied later. His mind flashed back to stories he had heard in his childhood. His uncle once told him, "Sometimes silence is the loudest mistake you can make." Those words echoed in David's ears as he kept recording. Meanwhile, Maria's breathing grew shallow. She wished she could send a message to her mother, a simple text saying, "I'm okay." Don't worry. But she couldn't. She had to stand there, answering questions that made no sense, waiting for the moment they would finally let her go. David thought about stopping the video for a moment. What if they noticed? What if they turned toward him? Fear gripped him, but courage spoke louder inside his heart. He adjusted his position slightly, moving behind a parked car, so he could keep recording without being seen. His voice inside said, "Don't stop. The truth needs light." The street, usually filled with the sound of evening chatter, was unusually quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the whole town was holding its breath. Maria felt that silence. She realized no one else was around to witness what was happening. Only one person, standing quietly in the shadows, carried the power to make this moment known to others. Her knees felt weak, but her spirit tried to stay strong. She thought of her dreams again, her wish to study, her hope to one day make her mother proud, her desire to live a life where she didn't have to feel small or powerless. These thoughts kept her from breaking down completely. David's recording captured every detail, the sharp tones, Maria's soft and trembling replies, the way her hands shook as she clutched her bag strap, the flickering streetlight above her head, casting uneven shadows. The video told a story words alone could not. In his mind, David was already making a decision. He could not keep this to himself. He knew people who had connections beyond this town. One of his old friends had joined an organization that worked closely with federal authorities. They had often talked about how small towns sometimes needed outside eyes to bring fairness back. If David shared this, maybe something bigger could happen. But fear tried to stop him. What if it brings trouble to me? What if they find out I was the one who recorded it? He swallowed hard. Yet when he looked again at Maria, just a young girl trying to go home, he felt a strong voice inside him saying, "This is bigger than you. Do the right thing." The minutes passed slowly, each one feeling like an hour. Maria's answers grew softer as her energy drained, but she still stood tall in her own way. She had not cried, though tears threatened to fall. She told herself over and over, "Stay strong. This will end. You will go home." Suddenly, David's phone buzzed slightly. It was a message from a friend, but he dared not check it. He feared even the smallest movement might draw attention. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, ensuring every second was captured. He thought of how powerful truth could be when shown in its pure form. A single video had changed the course of stories before, and maybe, just maybe, this one could too. Far away, Maria's mother sat at the kitchen table, glancing at the clock. It was later than usual, and worry began to grow in her heart. She thought of calling Maria, but something stopped her. She told herself Maria was fine, just delayed by a friend. But deep down, a mother's instinct whispered that something was not right. Back on the street, Maria lifted her head slightly and tried once more to explain herself. Her voice was filled with sincerity, but it felt like her words dissolved into the air. She wished someone would believe her. She wished someone would say, "It's okay, you can go home." David finally stopped hiding behind the car and leaned a little closer, though still out of sight. He wanted the video to be clear. His mind replayed a plan. Once safe, he would upload it somewhere that could not be erased, somewhere many eyes could see. And then, he would call his old friend. Maria's heart beat faster, but she held on to hope. She whispered silently in her mind, a prayer for protection, a plea for this night to end without further harm. She had no idea that destiny was already moving in her favor. Because just beyond the town's borders, in a place Maria could not see, people had been gathering evidence for weeks. Complaints, reports, and quiet warnings had reached federal ears. That night, things had already been set in motion. Cars were waiting. Calls had been made. And within minutes, a change none of them could have imagined would arrive on that very street. For now, Maria stood under the flickering light, her notebook still safe in her bag, her dreams still alive in her heart. David held his phone steady, his courage growing stronger with every second. And somewhere in the distance, headlights were already on their way, carrying the promise that truth would not remain hidden for long. The night air grew colder, though Maria hardly noticed. Her thoughts were fixed on her mother waiting at home, and her heart longed for the safety of her small kitchen table where she usually laughed about simple things. But here she stood, unsure of what would happen next. David still recorded quietly from the shadows. His phone had captured enough to show the truth, but he didn't dare stop. Every second mattered. He felt like he was carrying a secret that the world would need to see. Then, something happened that neither Maria nor David expected. From a distance, the soft sound of engines hummed through the night. At first, it seemed ordinary, like cars passing on a nearby road. But as the sound grew closer, David noticed the steady rhythm of several vehicles moving together. The headlights appeared, strong and purposeful, cutting through the darkness. Maria noticed them too. For a moment, her heart leaped with hope, though she wasn't sure why. The cars looked different, not like the local patrol cars she was used to seeing. These were larger, darker, and carried an air of authority. The vehicles pulled up quickly, stopping with precision just a few feet away. Doors opened almost in unison, and men and women stepped out, dressed sharply, carrying a presence that was impossible to ignore. Their jackets bore three simple letters that seemed to shine even under the dim streetlight: FBI. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She blinked twice, unsure if she was dreaming. She had only seen those letters on television or in movies. Never had she imagined seeing them right here, on her own street. David nearly dropped his phone in shock. He quickly steadied himself, realizing he had just recorded the moment the federal agents arrived. His heart raced, but this time, it was with relief. He whispered to himself, "They're here. Finally, someone is here." The FBI agents moved with calm confidence. They did not raise their voices or rush, but their presence filled the space with authority. They stepped between Maria and the officers, creating a barrier that spoke louder than words. Maria felt the tension in her chest loosen, as though someone had just lifted a heavy weight off her shoulders. One of the agents looked directly at Maria, his eyes soft but steady. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. His tone was not sharp, not accusing, it was filled with concern. Maria nodded slowly, her voice too shaky to answer. She felt seen for the first time that night. David kept recording, now with tears pricking his eyes. He had feared no one would ever notice what was happening in this town, but here was proof, powerful proof, that someone had been listening all along. The FBI had not come by accident. They had been preparing, waiting for the right moment to step in. The officers who had questioned Maria stood frozen, clearly unprepared for this sudden arrival. Their faces shifted from confidence to unease. The entire atmosphere of the street changed in an instant. Where fear had hung heavy just moments ago, now there was a sense of justice taking its first steps into the light. Maria finally found her voice. I just want to go home," she whispered. Her words carried all the exhaustion of the night, all the weight of standing alone under questioning. The agent nodded kindly. "You will. But first, we need to make sure you're safe." The agents asked Maria gentle questions, simple, respectful ones. They wanted to know her name, where she had been, if she needed medical help. Each question felt like a bridge back to safety. Maria answered, her voice trembling less with each word. For the first time that night, she felt believed. David stepped forward slowly, his phone still in hand. He was nervous, unsure if he should reveal himself. But one of the agents noticed him and walked closer. David swallowed hard, then said, "I recorded everything." His voice shook, but his words were steady. He held up the phone, showing the video. The agent nodded firmly. "That's important. "You did the right thing," he said. In that moment, David felt a wave of relief. The fear he had carried about being discovered was replaced by pride. His recording was no longer just a secret in his pocket, it was evidence that could not be denied. Maria turned her head slightly and saw David for the first time. Their eyes met briefly. She didn't know who he was, but in that short glance, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had not walked away. He had not stayed silent. The FBI agents quickly took control of the scene, guiding Maria gently to a safer spot near their vehicles. They assured her she was not in trouble, that she was simply a witness to something larger than herself. Maria listened, still trying to process the sudden shift in her night. Just an hour ago, she had been laughing at her friend's dinner table. Now she was surrounded by federal agents, her small town life pulled into something much bigger. David stood nearby, answering questions about what he had seen and why he had recorded. He told them about the whispers in town, about how many people had stayed quiet out of fear. The agents listened closely, writing notes, nodding at every detail. The street that had once felt empty now buzzed with energy. Neighbors peeked from their windows, astonished to see dark SUVs and men in suits outside their homes. Some whispered to one another, others simply stared in silence. Everyone knew something important was happening. Maria took a deep breath. For the first time that night, the air felt lighter. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but in that moment, she felt safe. The fear that had clung to her heart slowly began to fade, replaced by a fragile hope. David slipped his phone back into his pocket, his hands finally steady. He realized his small act of courage had mattered more than he ever thought possible. By choosing to record, he had given truth a voice. And now, with the FBI present, that truth could no longer be hidden. The agents reassured Maria again, promising her that she would be taken home soon, and that her safety was their priority. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but this time they were tears of relief. As the night deepened, Maria knew her life would never be the same. Neither would David's. Both of them had been drawn into a moment much larger than themselves. But together, with the unexpected arrival of justice on wheels, they had witnessed the beginning of change. The dark street, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now stood as the stage for a turning point, a moment when hope finally arrived, carried by the headlights of cars that came just in time. Maria sat quietly in the back seat of the FBI vehicle. The soft hum of the engine was the only sound around her. She stared out the window at the familiar streets of her town, streets she had walked on countless times before. But tonight, they looked different. They no longer seemed ordinary. They now held the memory of fear, of questions she could not answer, and of strangers who had stepped in to protect her when she felt completely alone. The agent sitting beside her smiled gently. "You're safe now," he said in a calm voice. "We'll take you home to your mother." Maria nodded, her eyes still fixed on the road. She wanted to believe those words fully, and slowly, they began to sink into her heart. She was going home. Meanwhile, David stood outside, answering more questions from the agents. He explained again why he had started recording and how he had known something was wrong the moment he saw Maria being questioned. The agents listened carefully, appreciating his courage. One of them even told him, "Not everyone would have done what you did tonight. But your choice matters. It will help bring light into places that have been in the dark for too long." David felt a warmth inside his chest. For years, he had lived quietly in the town, watching and hearing things that made him uneasy. He always wondered whether speaking up would even matter. Tonight gave him the answer. His small decision to press record had set off a chain of events bigger than anything he could have imagined. Back at Maria's home, her mother paced the kitchen floor anxiously. She glanced at the clock again and again, fear rising with every tick. When she finally heard the knock at the door, her heart leapt. She opened it to see two federal agents standing there with Maria behind them. Tears filled her eyes instantly as she pulled her daughter into her arms. Maria whispered softly, "I'm okay, Mama. I'm safe now." Her mother held her tighter, not wanting to let go. She looked at the agents with gratitude that words could not express. That night, the whole neighborhood buzzed with quiet talk. People peeked through curtains, whispered over phone calls, and wondered how the FBI had suddenly arrived in their small town. Some were surprised. Others felt relief. For many, it was the first time they believed real change might finally be possible. In the days that followed, news spread quickly. David's video became evidence that could not be ignored. Federal investigators stayed in town, looking into past complaints and speaking with families who had long remained silent. For the first time, people felt brave enough to share their stories. They saw that someone was listening now, someone who could actually bring fairness and accountability. Maria stayed close to her mother, recovering not just from the fear of that night but also from the shock of how quickly her world had changed. Friends came to visit her, bringing food, flowers, and words of encouragement. Some of them admitted they too had felt uneasy in the town but had never known what to do about it. Maria's experience reminded them that staying silent only gave more space for unfairness to grow. David, on the other hand, became someone people looked at differently. Neighbors who once barely noticed him now stopped him on the street to thank him quietly. Some told him, "You gave us courage," while others said, "Because of you, maybe things will finally change." David didn't see himself as a hero. He always replied, "I just did what anyone should do." But deep inside, he knew the truth that it had taken every bit of his courage to make that choice. For the town, the arrival of the FBI was not just about one night. It was the beginning of a larger transformation. Investigations revealed patterns that needed to be addressed. Slowly, steps were taken to rebuild trust between the community and those who were supposed to protect them. It was not easy, and it did not happen overnight, but the process had begun. Maria often returned to her small notebook in the days after. She flipped through the pages where she had written her dreams. "One day, I will leave this place, and I will be free to live the life I dream of." Those words now felt more powerful. She realized that her future was still bright, but her story had become bigger than herself. Her experience had sparked a conversation that her town could no longer ignore. Her mother encouraged her to keep writing, to keep dreaming, and to never let fear silence her. "Your voice matters," her mother told her one evening, holding her hand. Maria believed it now more than ever. David also carried new lessons with him. He learned that even when fear whispers, courage can still speak louder. His recording became a symbol of hope, showing that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when they chose to do the right thing. As weeks turned into months, the memory of that night remained fresh, but it no longer held only fear. It held lessons of bravery, unity, and the power of truth. For Maria, it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could arrive when least expected. For David, it was proof that silence was not the only option. And for the town, it was the beginning of a journey toward healing. One quiet evening, Maria sat at her window, looking at the streetlight that had once flickered above her during that unforgettable night. This time, it seemed to shine brighter, steadier, as if the town itself was beginning to find balance again. She opened her notebook and wrote a new line: "Sometimes, the hardest nights prepare us for the brightest mornings." David, too, stood at his own window across town, reflecting on everything that had happened. He smiled faintly, knowing he had played a small part in something bigger than himself. He whispered to himself, "Change begins when one person chooses not to stay silent." And though the town was still healing, hope had found a home there once again. The story of Maria and David was told quietly from neighbor to neighbor, from family to family, reminding everyone that no matter how small you feel, one action, one choice, can bring light into the darkest of places.